Thanks. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ben Self, Vice President of the Mansfield Foundation. It's my privilege to moderate today's discussion session, presentations on U.S.-Japan leadership in free and open infrastructure. This is a series that we've been conducting with the support of the Japanese Embassy, the Foreign Ministry of Japan here in Washington, emphasizing U.S.-Japan cooperation in the world. And there's been a great deal of interest in infrastructure cooperation and in meeting the enormous unmet needs for new infrastructure, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. That'll be our focus today. We're really looking at Southeast Asia as a test area for intensifying or enhancing U.S.-Japan cooperation in infrastructure. And we have three wonderful experts to discuss various aspects of this. Start going from my left to right. We'll start with Courtney Weatherby from the Stimson Center. She's a deputy director of the Southeast Asia program there, but has a broad awareness of Northeast Asia as well, both China and Japan. So really wonderful to have her here to explore both the on-the-ground needs within the region and then the role external actors like Japan, China, and the United States are playing in that area. Her research focuses on sustainable infrastructure and energy development challenges in Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific, particularly the nexus of issues in food, water, and energy in the greater Mekong subregion. She's done a great deal of work, including with the Mansfield Foundation in the past, and is involved with a number of our programs that specialize in infrastructure issues in the region. We met when she was a U.S.-Japan Southeast Asia Fellow at the East-West Center in Washington. So even if you're already in Washington at the Stimson Center, you can get a fellowship and work in Washington at the East-West Center. But that enabled her to really expand her focus on the role Japan plays and develop more expertise on that. So she'll be starting with her presentation, and then we'll proceed next to Suzuki-san. Hiroyuki Suzuki is the chief representative of the Washington office of the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, JBIC. He's a career JBIC official who has been in various departments at JBIC, including Treasury, Policy Planning and Coordination, Oil and Gas Finance, and Social Infrastructure Finance departments. He's also been in New York before coming to Washington, D.C. And while here in Washington, he's double-hatted. He has also a role affiliation at CSIS, just up the street. I don't think you get an office, but at least you get an affiliation. And in that capacity, has been publishing some of his thoughts and research on U.S.-Japan-China cooperation or competition in Southeast Asian infrastructure issues. So thank you, Suzuki-san, for your time participation. Finally, we'll turn last to Dr. Shino Watanabe. Oh, hi, please just grab some lunch, grab a seat at the table. Barry, it's good to see you. Watanabe Sensei is on the faculty of global studies at Sophia University, Jochi Daigaku in Tokyo. She was last year until during 2021, 2022, a visiting fellow under the Fulbright program at George Washington University, Seeger Center for Asian Studies. So we were fortunate to have her in town and could develop a great deal of cooperation. Now we brought her back from Japan just to join this panel and discuss and extend our discussion of infrastructure cooperation. So I've stalled for almost 5 minutes, and we've got a few more people in the room, but now I'd like to turn to Courtney.
Thank you, Ben. And I've got a PowerPoint presentation that we'll pull up, but my part of the presentation is really just going to focus on sort of the context. You know, what are the needs in Southeast Asia for infrastructure investment? What are some of the challenges that climate change is increasingly posing to the region in terms of infrastructure needs and investments? And then a little bit of context on what the US and Japan are already doing bilaterally and with the region on energy and infrastructure issues. And could be off. Right. Sure.
You need new batteries, remote control batteries.
Yeah, so to kickstart, I just really want to sort of highlight and update some of the figures that have been pretty regularly referenced in recent years. So a few years ago, the Asian Development Bank did a broad analysis and indicated that developing Asia, so that includes many countries in Southeast Asia, China, India, South and Central Asia, needed $26 trillion of investment in infrastructure in coming decades to meet projected needs. Now, this was a wide range of infrastructure, included energy and transportation, which were the bulk of the infrastructure investment needs within that figure, but it also included things like water, health, sanitation, and some other small urban resilience and urban infrastructure aspects. At the same time, when you focus on energy, which is the largest individual sector within that projection, and you focus on Southeast Asia, the needs are still pretty immense. Southeast Asia alone needs $2.7 trillion of investment in energy infrastructure. So thinking power generation plants and transmission lines through 2030. And that actually rises to $2.9 trillion if you're accounting for climate resilience. So setting aside some of the investments in technologies that are not quite yet commercially feasible, but might be on the market within coming decades, just building a future that's sustainable and is resilient in the face of climate change shocks will cost $2.9 trillion. We've also seen over the last couple of years, since we first started having this conversation with Mansfield Foundation, a bit of a shift in terms of what the national plans are for Southeast Asian economies in terms of meeting renewable energy targets and net zero targets. So currently 6 of the 10 ASEAN countries, or Association of Southeast Asian Nation countries, have net zero targets, usually ranging between 2050 and 2070 for the time frame for which they hope to reach net zero. But that's going to be a massive overhaul of the energy system for the region. Currently, the energy system is about 71% reliance on fossil fuels. That's actually under previous national power plans, expected to rise to 80% reliance on fossil fuels by 2040. Largely due to an expansion of natural gas infrastructure. So shifting away from that future, shifting investment out of coal and over time away from natural gas and towards renewable energy systems is going to take a major overhaul, not just in terms of what's being invested in, but also in terms of regulations and structural challenges for how energy systems work. So there's obviously a huge opportunity here, not just for these countries, but for development partners like the US and Japan to come in and help drive some of these conversations. And in terms of just physical investment needs, there's clear space for both development partners, but also particularly for catalyzing private finance. Historically, most countries in Southeast Asia spend about 2.1% of their GDP on infrastructure. That's risen a little bit in recent years. So that used to be about $50 billion a year. From 2016 to 2020, it rose to $70 billion a year. But the International Energy Agency projects that about $170 billion is needed annually in coming decades to meet these energy needs that I was just talking about. So there's clear opportunity to catalyze further private sector investment in this space to meet needs. I also just briefly want to touch on some of the particular challenges that climate change poses to infrastructure in Southeast Asia. So obviously, Southeast Asia has many island geography countries. It is highly vulnerable to sea level rise in particular. The IPCC estimates that about 300 million people in only 6 countries are, include China and India, but also Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand are within areas that will be flooded or subject to regular consistent flooding by 2050 due to projected sea level rise. The visuals on the screen here show what that looks like in a couple major areas. So the upper picture is basically a number of industrial zones dotted around the map that currently exist, projected against 1 meter sea level rise. So you can see in many areas that much of their surrounding infrastructure in terms of roads and transportation is likely to be affected. Some of the industrial zones and airport areas are also going to be deeply affected without further investment in flood protection or coastal defense infrastructure. And down in the lower picture, this is showing projected sea level rise, which you'll note is the vast majority of the land in the delta of 1 meter against existing power plants. So all of those power plants will be potentially subject to flooding. This is particularly important because countries around the region have already seen the impacts of intense weather events, whether it's massive storms like Cyclone Nargis or Typhoon Haiyan, or more regular rainfall where it's just intense rainfall, cause power outages and damage to infrastructure. Indonesia had about 1,000 blackouts in 2014 and 2015 due to intense rainfall and flooding and damage that it did to infrastructure. So this just highlights sort of the vulnerability of physical infrastructure within the energy space to extreme weather events and to sea level rise, and the need to do more to account for that in infrastructure planning around the region, and also to do more on data sharing. So there's very clearly at this point high level commitments to build a sustainable and resilient economy. I think countries, especially with the spate of major floods, droughts, and extreme events in recent years, this is on the policymaking radar. People are aware of it. People are concerned about it. But finding a way to sort of take those high level concerns and then mainstream them into actual policy and planning decisions at the local level for infrastructure requires a lot of data. You need to have localized projections for what the future will look like in terms of floods and droughts. You need to have a sense of what's changing in terms of the paths for major storms. A lot of that data is either not available or just not available to local planners. A lot of it's also not necessarily been turned into actionable information on what the updated risks are. For instance, Bangkok is regularly seeing what used to be considered 100-year floods. Some of this is climate change. Some of it is also another key challenge, which is other human changes. You know, people are changing the way that land is used. You're filling in wetlands. You're not necessarily taking a climate focused or long-term planning approach to city building and infrastructure. So you're essentially shifting people into areas that are vulnerable. And then the vulnerability is being increased by climate change impacts. So I just want to sort of flag this because a lot of this is sort of talked about separately from sort of the broader investment needs. And I think it's important to bring those conversations together. Both of them are talking about what, you know, outside development partners like the United States and Japan can do, and then also about tying together some of the initiatives that they already have on energy issues and on climate issues, and then separately on data and digitalization together to support a more forward-looking approach here. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through full details on all of the many bilateral and regional initiatives that the US and Japan have together. And I think that some of my co-panelists may also talk specifically about some of the work that's being done in this space. But looking at US, Japan, and Southeast Asia, there's a couple of initiatives that I do think are worth highlighting specifically for energy. The first is the Japan-US Mekong Power Partnership, which was announced in 2019 and really focused on sort of ensuring reliable, affordable, resilient access to energy. And a lot of the work in that space was done in the mainland countries of Southeast Asia. So Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and a little bit of Myanmar before the coup. Much of this was tied to renewable energy integration and also grid integration across the countries to allow for sustainable electricity trade. There's about $30 million spent so far, and I think the United States just announced another $20 million into funding for activities in this space late last year. Also last year were efforts globally to advance the Just Energy Transition Partnership Initiative, which is largely aimed at economies which have projected rises in emissions from coal, and efforts from development partners, including the US and Japan, to shift the transition away from coal earlier in these countries' power portfolios. It's particularly notable here because Japan took a significant amount of leadership on the JETP announcement for Indonesia, and was also involved in the JETP announcement for Vietnam, which are two of the economies in Southeast Asia which project the largest expansion of power generation needs and electricity demand in coming years. So there's clear opportunity to sort of continue these conversations as implementation of these JETP projects move forward, beyond the financing, to really tie that in with some of the bilateral initiatives that US, Japan, and other partners have in these countries in terms of capacity building and support. Because JETP tends to focus so far on financing, although the details haven't been announced for either of these plans yet. And then finally, I also just want to sort of flag the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which US and Japan, of course, are both members of, as are 7 of the 10 ASEAN economies. So there's a clear, again, opportunity here to sort of take a much broader framework and then apply it specifically in Southeast Asia. The third pillar for IPEF is focused on clean economies, and a huge number of the focus areas in that are tied to, again, clean energy integration, energy efficiency, improving energy resilience and security in the face of rising shocks. So I'm going to stop there. I'm more than happy to discuss any of this further, but I think this is a good starting point for conversations, specifically from Suzuki-san and Watanabe-san.
Thank you, Courtney. That was equally impressive and depressing. Serious challenges that we're facing, and the gap between the resources we are putting in and the needs is still enormous. But speaking of resources, JBIC is a major funder, and maybe we can hear from Suzuki-san.
Thank you. Thank you very much for kind introduction, Benson. And it is my great honor to be the one of the very important event and the panelists of the event. Actually, the theme of today's discussion, free and open to infrastructure, is what we are doing right now together with the US. And the JBIC Washington office, the main focus is how to collaborate more with US counterpart to support more enhance a free and open infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific region. So today I'd like to share with you the current effort of the JBIC together with the US counterpart and the other like-minded country. But before starting this current discussion, let me a little bit introduce about the JBIC's general overview of the JBIC. JBIC is a Japanese development financial institution. Originally, our main mission is support the Japanese companies' activities over support the export, the investment, of the critical product. But now our mission is expanding more to deal with a global agenda like climate change, the social related issue, and the healthcare. So it is very unique because we would like to utilize as much as possible from the expertise of the private sector. This is a totally different from the other DFI. So therefore, the other countries' DFI show a strong interest to collaborate more with JBIC. And of course, the US, our US counterpart is one of the important example. And we already set the collaboration platform with the US DFC, newly created a couple of years ago, fully backed up from the Congress by bipartisan. It is a very rare thing to get the bipartisan support under the current here situation. And last year, since the last discussion together with Courtney and Shino-san, we created an additional cooperation platform with the US PDA. PDA has a function of the technical support and the feasibility study to the host government. The background of creating the additional platform is finding a bankable project is very challenging in the developing country. So our concept is engaging the host country from the early stage, utilizing PDA's grant facility to create the bankable project and invite the private capital. And JBIC and DFC can be something like a catalytic role to be enhance bankability in the later stage. That is a new concept of our strategy of the bilateral cooperation together with US counterpart. That's the first topic I'd like to share with you today. The second topic is this kind of the bilateral platform is expanding to the multilateral platform. One of the examples is a Quad cooperation. Last year, Japanese government hosted a successful Quad summit in Tokyo in May. And at the timing of the Quad summit, under the Quad vaccine initiative, because last year was a very critical moment to tackling the COVID-19 situation, together with US counterpart, we provided financing support for the Indian pharmaceutical sector to expand their vaccine production facility. And we provided the financing to the Indian Exim Bank. It's a state-owned enterprise. And in case of the US, DFC is challenging to provide the financing support for the state-owned enterprise. So therefore, they separated the provided their financing support for the directly to the Indian private company, BioE. So under the broader umbrella of the cooperation scheme, under the Quad vaccine cooperation, JBIC and DFC parallelly provide the financing support. This is the new trend of the coordinated financing platform, in addition to the traditional co-finance. That is the second new effort. I also would like to share with you that at the timing of the Quad Summit, we also hosted the first Quad DFI roundtable among JB, DFC, DFAT Australia, and India and New Zealand. It is the first time. And we are the top manager of the whole institution discussed about the priority of the coordination. Of course, last year was the healthcare sector, but we confirmed that now the digital infrastructure and also the climate financing are also another area of the cooperation. So we would like to keep such kind of the cooperation among the other DFI countries of the Quad cooperation. Another multilateral cooperation platform is trilateral infrastructure partnership among US, Japan, and Australia. And we under this trilateral cooperation platform, we already sent this year to joint mission to Indonesia and Vietnam to hear host countries' voice, to understand their needs. Of course, the climate change is one of the examples. So in case of the Vietnam, in January, at the time of the Indo-Pacific Business Forum in Tokyo, we launched and announced the Vietnam climate financing facility. So to achieve net zero by 2050 or 2060 in accordance with each country's NDC, 3 countries DFIs coordinate the financing support to support the climate decarbonization. That is the new area of the cooperation right now among the 3 countries. And in addition to this kind of the coordinated financing approach, we also continue to seek the co-financing. It would take a certain timeline for the collaboration, but we are keeping a traditional effort also. So I remember last year I shared with you that our existing example of the collaboration in Palau to support the Palau subsea cable. But we believe within a couple of weeks, we can announce additional trilateral cooperation project in Pacific Island. So this is all the update effort of the cooperation with the US and the other like-minded countries. But it is a very good occasion to discuss these audiences today. So I also would like to share with you this year's challenge. One challenge is how to achieve both the decarbonization and energy security. And now also the securing the economic growth is also another challenge, especially in case of the Indo-Pacific region, because main countries like Vietnam or Indonesia, population is increasing. So we have to find a sweet spot of the area of the cooperation with US and other like-minded countries to achieve both climate change, energy security, and economic growth. Of course, renewable energy and grid modernization should be and also the nuclear in the mid and long term should play the critical role in the Indo-Pacific region. But under the transition period, we also are finding the needs from the regional country that still the natural gas and the LNG is playing the critical role. And of course, as Courtney mentioned, we have the G7 cooperation platform to support the climate change, JBIC, for Vietnam and Indonesia, and now India is also included the target country. But the JBIC does not include natural gas. So this is one of the challenges. But on the other hand, the current Prime Minister Kishida administration launched another platform, Asia Zero Emission Community. So I think Prime Minister Kishida wants to be something like a bridge between the JBIC and also regional needs. And so we would like to collaborate, utilize AZEC, and to be something like a bridge between the regional country and the JBIC. Of course, the natural gas and LNG should be one of the key components of the ASIC platform. So this is one of our challenges. The second challenge is how to respond to the expectation from the region under the US-Japan strategic competition. Unfortunately,
US-China strategic.
I'm sorry. US-China strategic competition. Unfortunately, the tension in the DC is very, very high.
Yeah.
So we have to, as a middle part of the Indo-Pacific region, Japan should play a very critical role to support regional country. Because regional country does not want to choose US or China, but still shows some concern to too much depend on the BRI. So we have to provide additional product of the financing energy space. So this is the second challenge. And in addition to the infrastructure of energy space, now the supply chain is another challenge. So we like to collaborate more with Japanese industry and the US industry to support the supply, to create a resilient supply chain. So I stop here and I'd like to discuss with other panelists and the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzuki-san. That was incredibly rich. I think I absorbed about 8% of what you shared, but luckily we're recording this and I'll be able to watch it later. Fascinating, and I think there's a lot left unsaid about other aspects of energy transition in Southeast Asia in particular that we can amplify this discussion and in the Q&A. But before that, I'd like to zoom in more narrowly with Watanabe Sensei for a discussion of her recent research efforts in Cambodia and an examination of the on-the-ground realities of infrastructure needs and investment, particularly Chinese infrastructure investment. Shino.
One moment, we're having some technical difficulties with the PowerPoint, but I will get it up in just a short moment.
You're as old as I am, you remember television shows would occasionally have the please stand by technical difficulties. Here we go.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. I sincerely appreciate the Mansfield Foundation for inviting me to this very important luncheon seminar. And also I feel very honored to be here at this office after the COVID with such distinguished panelists and also guests today. It's almost a cliche that developing countries face a significant gap between infrastructure needs and financial resources, as the Courtney-san briefly mentioned at the beginning. And indeed, the availability of funds has been the central issue. Today, we have seen more private finance coming into infrastructure in developing countries. In fact, multilateral development banks have been playing an important role in encouraging private investment in developing countries as well. In general, it is positive development, I would say, but we also need to recognize some setbacks as well. So in this presentation, I would like to focus on China's infrastructure development through public-private partnership as one example, and mainly a model of project finance called Build, Operate, and Transfer, BOT. Based on my field research in Cambodia last December, I'd like to highlight major characteristics of Chinese PPP, private partnership. And also, my conclusion is that we need to better prepare for future risks. So I wanted to explain a little bit. And this is the flow of today's presentation. Sorry. Yeah. This is an outline of my presentation. First, I wanted to briefly talk about infrastructure development with Chinese characteristics. And then I just want to focus on PPP, particularly BOT. And my second part is a case study of Sihanoukville in Cambodia. Sihanoukville is a port city in Cambodia, and major challenges ahead. Okay. Nowadays, a growing number of Chinese infrastructure projects is financed through public-private partnership. And the most typical way is BOT, as I mentioned. In other words, Chinese companies build infrastructure projects with their own funding, and they operate the project for a contract period, such as 50 years, in order to collect fees to repay the money initially invested, and also interest for the companies as well. And after the contract period is over, the ownership of infrastructure project would be returned to the government of developing countries. This is a system build, operate, and transfer the ownership in the end. That is the main mode of financing infrastructure development in developing countries by Chinese companies today, in addition to loans. Today, I don't want to talk about loans, but I just focus on this type of investment. And usually, contract periods of general BOT are basically between 10 years, 10 to 30 years in general. But when it comes to Chinese BOTs, the contract period is much longer. Like the longest, as far as I found, is 55 years. And the average of Chinese BOT, as far as I get the information, is about 28 years. So you can see that Chinese BOT tends to last longer than general BOT in other countries, by other countries' companies. And then the World Bank collects nice data and makes a wonderful database available for public. But you know, having said that, BOT is a private activity. So it's really difficult for the World Bank to get the accurate information, as many as possible. So even though the World Bank publicized the database, it's not the comprehensive one, but it's the best one, as far as I know, that it's available for public. So scholars like me can utilize the information. And then Chinese infrastructure development. First, I wanted to, sorry. As I said, Chinese BOT basically are much longer than other BOT. And then based upon the database, private participation infrastructure made by the World Bank, I did some kind of basic analysis. And among about 11,000 projects worldwide, 1,200 Chinese projects. It's about 11% of the world total. But if you look at those like 1,200 projects, most of the projects are domestic in China. In other words, what is important is to look at 120 projects which Chinese companies do investment overseas. And if I look into those 120 cases, you can see about half, like 62 cases BOT and 32 build, own, and operate, but no transfer, meaning that those 32 projects will be owned by Chinese companies for good. In any case, you can see that this is 120 cases, and if you look at distribution of those 120 cases, it is centered on specific country. The most important country for Chinese BOT is actually Brazil. And then the second important country is Cambodia. And then you can see so many Southeast Asian countries, Asian countries lining up. So that is one of the reasons why I want to focus on case study in Cambodia today. And then this is a map of Cambodia. And you can see Sihanoukville is the port city along the
Hidden down
bay. Yeah, exactly, thank you.
the bottom.
And Sihanoukville is the only deep water port for Cambodia. So most important port is Sihanoukville. But Sihanoukville is also called Macau of Southeast Asia, Macau, because it is also famous for gambling. Like so many official and unofficial online casinos. So that's an interesting place. At the same time, Sihanoukville is very famous for two SEZs, two special economic zones. One is built by Japan's ODA, which is very close to the port. This is the map, and you can see on your left side, the blue circle, that's the port of the Sihanoukville. Just next to the port, Japan's ODA is used to build a SEZ. At the same time, China also built another SEZ. On your right side, you can see a kind of yellow place, and that is SEZ that was built by Chinese money. And it's about 12 kilometers away from the port. So, but you can see two SEZs here. But going back to the previous slide, what I want to highlight is, even though China started to build SEZ in 2010, it was not the only story. Chinese infrastructure development came as a package. In case of Sihanoukville, you can see China invested in building airport and also road, and the city of Sihanoukville by inviting a lot of tourism industries like hotels and casinos. And also China brings a lot of Chinese workforce to build those construction sites, and also a lot of Chinese tourists, so that the Chinese hotels industry can profit. And also China brings some crimes and also environmental destruction as well. So it's kind of all package coming. And then I wanted to show you a couple of pictures about Chinese SEZs. I had the opportunity to visit Chinese SEZ before the COVID in April 2019. And the entrance into the SEZ, you can see Chinese characters. It's almost like China, even though it's in Cambodia. And this is the main building on your right side. And this is outside the building. Inside the building, if you have been to China, you can recognize this is almost like a Chinese building. And then this is the factory and also dormitories, not for Cambodian workers, but dormitories for Chinese workers, because Cambodian workers commute to the SEZ. So like they inside the SEZ, they also built dormitories for Chinese workers coming from China for a short time. And interestingly, Chinese money also is spent to build college inside the Chinese SEZ. And this is a nice campus inside the SEZ. And this college has only two majors. One is engineering. Another one is business administration. Why? Because China tries to do some kind of human capital investment, basically for Chinese companies or Chinese factories in this SEZ. So Chinese wants to have like Cambodian who can be a middle-level managers, not the president, not the head, but at least like some kind of a middle-level kind of specialist. That's one of the reasons why they created this college. And then interestingly, the college also teaches foreign language, but unfortunately, students had no other option but to study Chinese. You can see, because they want to have Cambodian who can speak Chinese so that they can communicate with Chinese bosses coming from the mainland. So it's a very nice package. This is just one example, but the last case I wanted to focus on is Phnom Penh Sihanoukville Expressway. This is a famous expressway connecting the capital of Cambodia, Phnom Penh, to the Sihanoukville. And then this is about a 200-kilometer long expressway. The construction started in March 2019. And interestingly, it is a BOT project. And the expressway, surprisingly, opened in October 2022, meaning almost like just like 2 years. Chinese company with Chinese workers completed the construction of 200-kilometer expressway. And this is the homepage of the Cambodian Phnom Penh Sihanoukville Express company. And I had an opportunity to visit the site twice. First, in April 2019, before the COVID pandemic. It was just 1 month after the start of the construction. You can see those two pictures, almost nothing. Just 1 month after the construction started. And then last December, I also had the opportunity to visit Cambodia and do some kind of field work. And this is, I want to show you a couple of pictures. And the first one is a kind of entrance at the Phnom Penh to Sihanoukville. But you can see a toll gate and also nice, beautiful kind of expressway. And you can see also picture of toll gates and also like a sign indicating some kind of limit of workload, a limit of like loads for the trucks. And you can see that another picture on your right side. This is a kind of expressway. At the same time, you will see a kind of sign. It's an advertisement. Sometimes I saw those kind of advertisements on my way to Sihanoukville. But interestingly, all advertisements, the contents are Chinese companies. No Cambodian companies. All Chinese companies advertisement, both in Chinese and the Khmer language. So it's again a part of example of a package development. And you can see the nest area on your left side. Unfortunately, it was still under construction, even though the expressway opened, but there are some other places under construction. But interestingly, it has a very comfortable drive, as you can imagine. And another reason why it was very comfortable was that there were very few passenger vehicles on the expressway. Moreover, not a single truck was driving on the highway while I was driving for like 4 hours, like one way, 2 hours, and another way going back to Phnom Penh, 2 hours. I didn't see any truck on the expressway. You can see that in contrast, the traditional Route 4 was very crowded with trucks. And then Route 4 runs one lane, but actually you can see that 2 trucks were running in the same direction. You know, it's kind of really dangerous. At the same time, the right side, the truck is heavily loaded. You can see that somewhat tilted. So even though like highly nice Chinese built expressway opened last year, unfortunately, Route 4 is more popular among truck drivers. So this is a kind of example that, you know, hardware is very nicely institutionalized. At the same time, you have to have software to see whether this infrastructure project is sustainable or not. At the same time, China's BOT could become a new model of debt trap financing in developing countries in the future. Because as I said, this construction expressway, the money should come from fees that the passengers pay. But as you can see, almost no passenger vehicles, no trucks. So this project contract period is 50 years. In other words, it is we can expect after 50 years, the ownership of the expressway could be transferred to the government of Cambodia, but you never know what's going to happen. So in that sense, it's a kind of interesting way to see, you know, how successful Chinese BOTs will be in developing countries. So my last point, Chinese companies' ownership of foreign projects could pose geostrategic, geopolitical risk to local communities and developing countries in the long run, especially if these BOT projects are not cannot yield enough profit within the determined certain contact period. So it has a lot of potential to be very risky investment in the long run. So we tend to pay much attention to Chinese loans, and I totally agree with it. I have been working on that. At the same time, we also have to look at a more private partnership project, which is not transparent, but which could create another or more serious problem in the long run because it's invisible. I will stop here. Thank you very much. Sorry to spend so much time. But...
No, fascinating photographs and on-the-ground experience. I like how we came from the satellite views and the big picture all the way down to the details. And I think we'll engage with our audience for some Q&A in just a moment. I just wanted to highlight what to me seems like a striking conundrum here, which is that we're looking at many trillions of dollars of unmet infrastructure need, and yet a huge difficulty of finding reasonable investments or appropriate ways to invest capital to meet those needs. And I'm wondering, what do you see? Each of you might offer your thoughts. And I think you already started to mention the technical evaluation tools that the US side is supporting, but what might be some ways that we could connect those two sides, this huge unmet need for infrastructure development, and yet this problem of finding suitable projects for individual project finance? What would be the bridge to make it easier to meet that vast amount of unmet infrastructure financing need? Do you have any thoughts that, and particularly since it is about US-Japan cooperation in the world, any ideas about how the US and Japan might do that together? Start with Courtney.
Sure. So I think I'll just put in sort of one example case study that I think is likely has lessons that are applicable for other countries as well. So one of the challenges with getting international investment in renewable energy projects in Vietnam, it's a regulatory issue and a policy issue. It's very specifically the terms of power purchase agreements put a huge amount of risk on the project investors and a very limited amount of risk on the national utility. Specifically, they're not guaranteeing that they'll purchase the electricity that's produced from solar and wind projects. And there's a good reason for that. It's that the grid has limited capacity to integrate variable solar and wind. They work differently. So, there's grid investment that's needed and capacity building that's needed, but there's also issues in terms of working through those issues from the regulatory side. And there's opportunities for technical support and capacity building there from the United States and Japan for countries like Vietnam, which are sort of struggling or in earlier phases of the renewable energy transition. They're facing sort of long-held policy approaches and regulations that require investment to be a certain way and require a lot of the risk to be held by the investors, rather than the public sector. And there's ways to work through that and share lessons learned for what worked, because these countries are where they need private investment. They want private investment. Vietnam did manage to get a lot of domestic private investment from Vietnamese companies. So they had a huge growth of solar and wind, but that's only going to get them so far. They need to add another 180 gigawatts of offshore wind. That's a huge amount. It's more than their entire energy system is right now, for perspective. That's going to require private investment. So they need to get the regulatory situation right so that people will come in and invest. Because if they can't get that right, they're going to have these very ambitious targets and they're not going to be on track to meet them. So again, this is just an example. Vietnam is certainly not the only country that does this, and they are working through a lot of these grid challenges and some of the regulatory challenges, but it's shared because especially with renewable energy technologies, whether it's solar and wind or things like hydrogen, which the US and Japan are both deeply involved in supporting in the region, they need to have the regulatory framework in place to make it truly commercial.
Fantastic. And I think technical guidance for the governments may also come into play there. Suzuki-san.
So under the current macroeconomic and geopolitical situation, in many cases, developing countries prefer to utilize the PPP model to avoid the budgetary constraint, and also you would like to utilize the support from the private side. But many cases, the host countries tend to be PPP is the private-public partnership, but it tends to rely on too much on the private side. that would create something like a debt trap situation in the
Mhm.
long run. So careful coordination among the private side and the public side is very important. It is very hectic work and it will take a certain timeline, but Japanese industries are very good at to deal with coordinate between the public side and the private side. And in many cases, JBs collaborate closely with the Japanese companies like the Japanese trading houses to create something out of the risk sharing model.
Right.
So it is very complicated procedure. It is not possible to finalize only the 1 or 2 years. It is common to take a couple of years, but in the long run, it is the key point of the success. And I also would like to add the Japanese companies are very good at collaborate recently with a local company.
Right.
That would create the sustainable infrastructure to benefit for the local community. So I think that these kind of elements and the strengths of the Japanese company is the key component to support in a sustainable manner. And I think that is a key component to be something like a good fit between the needs and the tangible benefit.
Excellent. I think we just need to scale it up, maybe increase the number of staff at JBIC so that you can do more of this good work. And Watanabe Sensei.
Yes, that's a really difficult, but the most important question you raised, I think. And my answer is perhaps information sharing between the US government and the Japanese government might be one way. I totally understand that information sharing between American firms and Japanese companies could be difficult because they are to some extent rivals in terms of business getting the market. But when it comes to the government, because the US and Japan have a kind of security alliance with a very deep trust each other, so information sharing works. For instance, strengths of Japan's long experience doing business in Burma, today's Myanmar, which US doesn't have, for instance. And the US experience doing business in the Philippines, maybe Japan's company's experience is not comparable. So each country has strengths in specific country. So in that sense, both sides can compare notes and then explain, share some information. That could be one way.
Excellent.
Can I add one point?
Yes.
And in case of the developing country, still the state-owned enterprise playing a critical role for the development. In case of the US market, of course, the private capital is a main player for the cutting edge technology and the new type of the business. And it's the key component of the US market. But in case of the developing country, the situation is different. So one of the key components how to engage local companies, including the state-owned enterprise. So therefore, of course, JBIC is promoting the private-oriented economy, but engaging state-owned enterprise. So in case of the Indonesia, of course, we support the PPP project, the power project and the power project. But at the same time, we support directly to the PLM or Pertamina, for example, to their effort of the decarbonization. So this kind of the dual effort to private project and also the sovereign or quasi sovereign project is a key component to support the development country. And unfortunately, the country DFC is a little bit reluctant to support the provide the financing support for the state-owned enterprises.
Yes.
So we are having the continuous discussion with the US counterpart to make them understand the importance of this kind of thing.
So sometimes it's US-Japan collaboration and sometimes it's division of responsibility where the US might take a role that Japan doesn't fill or vice versa. Very interesting. I'd like to open it up to questions. We have some online viewers. Your questions can also be raised, but please identify yourself and if you have a specific person that you'd like to ask, indicate to whom you're addressing your question. Nobody's making eye contact with me. Nobody has any questions. I think this is an absolutely fascinating topic, and I'm grateful to all three of you for your presentations. I'll just ask another question and give you time to think. I'm really curious about the role of the International Finance Corporation. The IFC is a multilateral private institution here in Washington, D.C. The shareholders are governments, but it itself is a private company. And it seems to me that it stands in between public sector international development banks or multilateral development banks and fully private sector for-profit investment, right? Because it doesn't need to make the same return on investment, but it can link those two. Where do you see the IFC playing a key role in infrastructure, especially in clean energy transition in Southeast Asia?
Sure, I'll just jump in, and I should note I don't have a good sense of exactly what IFC is already investing in Southeast Asia, but I do know one area that they have invested in a couple of countries is on sort of the strategic planning level. And I think that's particularly valuable, again, when we're thinking about sort of the cumulative impacts of land change and other human changes to environments and cumulative impacts of infrastructure along with climate change. So for instance, they've supported strategic environmental assessments on cascade planning for hydropower. So rather than looking at one project at a time, so usually what a project comes up, it goes through an individual environmental impact assessment. There's very limited analysis and understanding of how that project fits into the broader landscape and thus the broader vulnerabilities from climate change and other impacts of infrastructure. The IFC has supported strategic environment assessments that look at sort of the basin level. I think that type of strategic planning is particularly valuable given the increasing intersections that we're seeing between climate change and infrastructure, and then different types of infrastructure as well.
Wonderful. So it's almost an informational role that we were just discussing, the importance of information sharing transparency, that they're providing that broader context for both government agencies that are investing and private companies that are investing to understand the impacts and how they interact.
And I think that will hopefully help identify projects that are closer to bankability as well, because it provides some of that context for which projects may run into higher vulnerability and higher risk, and then projects which can perhaps be coordinated more effectively where the impacts and the risks are known.
Right.
So again, getting to that bankability line that we were talking about, I think that type of strategic planning is valuable. Obviously, IFC can also support direct projects, but I think there's a dearth of groups that are supporting the sort of strategic planning. And that's one area that IFC can and does play a support role.
Thank you. I'm sure you deal with the IFC, your office is across the street from them, right?
So in addition to our US counterpart, we are expanding the cooperation with MDBs, especially the World Bank.
Okay. Well,
Because under the current macroeconomic situation, the debt sustainability and also the right path to achieve net zero by 2050 is very, very important for JBIC itself. And the World Bank has a strong expertise to discuss with host government about these two aspects, the sustainability and the climate change. So we are expanding the discussion with them to create a co-financing project to deal with these kind of aspects. So I believe that within a few weeks, we can announce a new co-financing project with IFC. And now we have the MOU, cooperation platform with IFC, and we have the regular basis deep dive discussions with IFC, and we strongly expect to increase the co-financing project more with the IFC in the future.
Excellent. Any thoughts on that point of the?
Almost nothing. Right.
I think it's interesting that there is this private bank that is owned by the shareholders being governments, and the role it plays bridging between the World Bank and the private sector. Randy.
Okay, so Ben, I'll take the first question. What I wanted to ask about Kazakhstan, I thought your introduction of the explanation of the Chinese BOT business model is very interesting. I wanted to understand a little bit more. Is there a fundamental difference between regular BOTs and a Chinese BOT, other than the fact that it is much longer? Usually when companies like ours take on BOT, for example, maybe it's like years and we take responsibility. We first invest in whatever the infrastructure is, and then over the 20 years, our revenue is maybe if it's a highway, it's coal, or if it's a power plant, we have power purchase agreements with the utilities, so where we sell electricity for 20 years at a certain price. And then at the end of 20 years, after we recover all our investment, we transfer the facility and then we exit. To me, correct me if I'm wrong, that is my understanding of a regular scheme. So during the first 20 years, usually the government itself does not have any debt. Unless they give us some kind of subsidy at the beginning, or there may be individual arrangements for every contract. So how does the Chinese BOT system create a debt trap situation? I guess that's my question.
Or it's a quasi debt trap situation, right? Maybe it's not literally debts in the form of loans or bonds, but please.
Thank you very much for your question. I think your question has two parts. First is what are major characteristics of Chinese BOTs, if any? And the second one is a link between like a Chinese BOTs and also like so to speak, debt trap. And the first part, as far as I understand, Chinese companies, even though I use Chinese companies, actually the main entity of Chinese BOT basically are Chinese state-owned enterprises, Chinese SOEs, not Chinese like it's hard to say in China, but it's not like a Chinese purely private companies. There's the difference. And big business basically in China are Chinese state-owned enterprises. But that's the one big issue. And because if genuine private companies, they have to think very strategically, and they have to think about the profit in a relatively short time amount. And they are very like a risk averse, I would say. And then their risk benefit, cost benefit analysis could be more like a market-based and no political calculation included. But unfortunately, I think Chinese case, it could be totally opposite. So it's really hard from outside to see what kind of a cost-benefit analysis they can use, because a political factor is a very important element. So in that sense, usually from a Japanese company's perspective, one project could be a kind of unbankable, but maybe Chinese companies do it as BOT. So that's a big difference. And the second question, the linkage between the Chinese BOTs and debt trap. At this moment, I cannot say it exists at this moment. But in my view, BOT could be a nice way for China to gain the ownership of foreign kind of investments, because Chinese companies don't have to transfer instantly, meaning that for the time being, the ownership is by Chinese. At the same time, because it's so long, not 10 years, 13 years, you never know what's going to happen. And then it might be a nice kind of means to, how can I say, disguise kind of bad non-performing loans to a kind of BOT for a while. And in the long run, a BOT project could be a kind of semi-bad loans, and then it could be another way to debt trap. If like a Chinese banks extend loans, the debt trap happens after those loans could be kind of, those loans turn to be bad loans. But BOT, maybe it could be, even at the beginning, it could be the starting point of a debt trap. But it's never known, but it's too early. But I'm talking about a possibility. I'm not talking about the kind of a destiny yet. We have to see. But I think this could be a very important factor in the future. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Please.
Thank you. Peter Watson from the Dwight Group. Professor, just thinking about the debt trap construct for BOTs, many of these contracts, I assume, have various assumptions. I spent some time at OPIC, and as a function of contract language, I suspect that there are assumptions that are built into the financial structuring of these arrangements that have the assumptions would have certain returns on them as a predicate to actually either the payment of, for example, how I'm getting to this and thinking about this is the very limited amount of traffic on that toll road. And so you have to ask yourself, why is that? Very likely you has to do with toll arrangements and the toll fees. Did you happen to make a note of what those toll fees were at all? Did you understand how high or low they might be?
Thank you very much. I heard that it opened in like October last year, and for the first 3 months, as a part of advertisement, toll fee was for free. And then I went at the end of December, and we had to pay a kind of a fee. And it was from our perspective, it's very affordable. From Phnom Penh to Sihanoukville, about 200 kilometers away, just one passenger vehicle, $12 for one way. So the other way around, another $12. So just $24. It's a really kind of low. So
And for cargo, did you get any? You said trucks. This is the important question.
I didn't get the exact figure, but I asked some kind of bureaucrats in the Sihanoukville, and they said that it's not like costly. It's not that a huge amount of money.
Interesting.
But the reason why there are no trucks, and I also asked, and there are some reasons. For instance, because it was a very nicely built new, expressway. So this company has a very strict kind of regulation how many tonnages one truck can carry. So it's like overloaded. The truck cannot use this expressway. But in Cambodia, it's a kind of interesting country with a lot of kind of institutionalized mechanism of corruption. And then truck drivers want to carry as much as possible for one round way to get extra cash. So there are no incentive for them to use the expressway because they could be caught for the overloaded truck. At the same time, they cannot, carry a lot of load for one way. At the same time, another thing is gas price. Because this is such a nice way to go to Sihanoukville, just less than 2 hours. So it's a very gas efficient. But if you use the road 4, it's so crowded. You cannot tell how much gas you spent. In other words, if you use a road 4, that could be another way to create a corruption. In other words, drivers can get extra screaming more gas than they used. So it's a kind of institutional mechanism of kind of corruption and gaining extra cash for drivers. So even if they have a nice facility there, they don't switch to use it.
So where I see the relationship between the income off the roading and the tolls goes back to the underlying assumptions that have been negotiated. And so if you're not getting those returns that have been negotiated, then I suspect that there are default mechanisms under the contract which allow the operators of the facility to push out the term, or even be able to, as you point out, in informal ways, convert the contract arrangements into actual de facto ownership. So I can see this as being interestingly enough. So the idea there is actually not to build efficiency.
Exactly.
Optically, it looks like they've done it. But in truth, what they're doing is actually creating a facility that they get to own for long term and really serve their own interest in terms of transportation. That was sort of one way of thinking about it.
Exactly. Of course, I cannot approve, because it's a kind of private activities. It's really hard to get the kind of, contents of the contract, but I can assume that could be one calculation, not the only calculation, but that's definitely. And also it's a kind of counterintuitive because if, they cannot get enough revenue, usually based upon the market mechanism, maybe the price could be higher, but the more the fee cost, the less cuts you can see.
Precisely.
So it's very interesting mechanism.
It is, isn't it?
Right. Thank you.
Other questions from the floor? I don't think we have any from online yet. No? Oh, yeah.
Yes, my name is Nick. I'm privileged to be an intern at the Mansfield Foundation. This question's directly for Suzuki-san. So Japan is being very proactive in developing and financing a lot of efforts to decarbonize developing countries, Southeast Asia, focusing on. And I was wondering if you know any about like the efforts to mobilize kind of a consensus like domestically. I know Japan is very adept in public diplomacy, and we have ODA Man, very popular. And I was wondering what forces would you know are mobilizing support at home for these international development efforts?
I think one of the key components from the domestic view is now the Japanese industry is keen to achieve net zero domestically, and they have strong aspirations to get a cutting edge and the more efficient energy system. And this is one of the key opportunities to enhance their productivity also. And now many companies have the activity both in the domestic and the overseas. And unfortunately, domestically, Japan has a very bureaucratic system. So many countries have a strategy to try the new type of the business overseas, then import again to utilize their business in domestic domain. So I believe, for example, in case of the nuclear, it is very challenging to start the new business domestically in Japan. Even Prime Minister Kishida announced a new concept of the green transformation, and the nuclear is one of the key components right now. But still, it is very challenging for a utility company to restart a nuclear power plant as soon as possible. But on the other hand, nuclear needs some expertise of the technician and also the supply chain. So some Japanese company already started the business overseas. So JBIC supporting such kind of the business strategy. And we believe this kind of the support should benefit for the domestic decarbonization. That is one of the examples.
Other questions? We haven't really talked much about decarbonizing the transportation sector. There's always a lot of discussion about the energy sector, but we know Southeast Asia, Vietnam is famous for the scooters and motorcycles and other even cars that are not very clean, not electric vehicles. And then there's all the question about railway infrastructure. What are the low-hanging fruits of decarbonizing transportation infrastructure in Southeast Asia?
Well, I'll throw out a first thought. I think the easiest low-hanging fruit, and some of the countries have started to do this already, is to push for electric vehicles in public transit. So thinking of buses, thinking of taxi fleets, because those are often owned by a company. You know, the big challenge with decarbonizing the transportation system, and this is anywhere, not just in developing countries, is that people buy cars and then they use them for a long time. You know, you're not going out and buying a new car, generally speaking, every few years. And so if you've just recently maintained ownership of a car or of a new motorcycle, it's going to be hard to convince you as somebody who's got limited funds available to then immediately purchase an electric vehicle, especially if the resale value of your car that uses gasoline is going down. So I think you are certainly seeing initiatives to push electric vehicles to become more affordable. You're seeing subsidies, you're seeing local supply chain investments throughout Southeast Asia. I know Thailand's doing a lot in this space. I think Indonesia's got ambitions there as well. But I think the lowest hanging fruit is going to be working with the companies, working with public transit systems to decarbonize, whether that's through electric vehicles or in some cases, they're looking at hydrogen or other alternatives as well.
Thank you.
I would say Japanese railroad company has a strong expertise of the high-speed railroad.
Yeah.
And also not only the high-speed railroad project, but also the local line. And the train system is well organized, utilizes the train station. And the train station is a very good location to invite the local people and the local restaurant and the local shop. This kind of the city management has another expertise which Japanese train company has. So I'm not sure it is the low-hanging fruit, but it is very important that Japanese train company treats not focusing on the high-speed railroad train, but also the whole train and the
Commuter train.
commuter train and the city development concept.
Excellent.
I have to add more. My friend Kitara-san from the JR.
Actually, our company is a former Japan National Railway. So we have no experience of development the new line, new greater lines or new high-speed rail. Currently, we are now constructing the Chuo Shinkansen, another high-speed rail between Tokyo and Nagoya, finally Osaka. But as Lucia said, after the privatization of the Japan National Railway, the OJR has some experience or knowledge about the train-oriented business, like the development of the rail ST or some merchandise facilities in the station area. Not only the merchandise, but also the hotel business or something like that. Those kind of things can make a lot of positive economic effect to the area or the community where the train station is there. So those kind of know-how will be provided through the cooperation between Japan and Southeast Asian countries. That is, the kind of the strength of the Japanese railway.
Excellent. Our members of Congress were in Japan last week. We took a delegation of 5 members who were so impressed with Japanese railway in the Tokyo area and on Shinkansen. So
thank you,
you made a positive impression.
Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
AOC, make a lot of statements through our Instagram.
Yes. So on social media.
Many magazines or reporter, the newspapers reported our impression through the Japan business. It was a very effective. I
have a question from Phyllis Vincent, a former Mansfield fellow from the Department of the Interior who works on energy issues from online for Suzuki-san, asking about how Russia's war in Ukraine has affected Japan's approach to the just energy transition JETP activities, particularly since coal is inexpensive relative even to natural gas right now and oil, setting aside even the more expensive renewables.
So after Russian invasion to Ukraine, the energy market is very flat. The Indo-Pacific region also showed concern about the price of the natural gas and energy. Obviously, it is not affordable price right now. So, but on the other hand, from the Japanese viewpoint, it is also very important to create some more stable natural gas market, energy market in the Indo-Pacific region. One of the unique points of the Asian region is we don't have the natural gas pipeline like the US or Europe. So still the LNG take a critical role. But under the current geopolitical situation, the LNG market does not have so much liquidity.
Right.
So therefore, the price is very
Very
up and
low.
down. So we need to support some liquidity of the LNG market from the financial viewpoint. So of course, it's true that LNG and natural gas is very expensive right now. Therefore, we need to create a more stable LNG market in the Pacific. And we strongly believe US has to play a critical role to utilize the US LNG to provide not only the European region, but also the Indo-Pacific region. So we strongly expect US counterpart to also support such kind of effort.
Well, that goes back to the Japan-US strategic energy partnership. Before the clean energy partnership, there was major cooperation on US natural gas and
It's not a contradictory approach. We need to be more holistic approach.
but coal seems to be, it hasn't come up very much today. I'm sort of glad to hear that you're not still advocating carbon capture and utilization as a key tool from JBIC's point of view.
Of course, under the agreement among the G7 country, from this year, we quit new coal power plant project. And now another challenge is to accelerate the early retirement of the coal power plant in the Pacific. But it creates a very complicated cost sharing mechanism with the existing investor and the financier. So we are very keen to collaborate with private side and the host government side. What kind of the mechanism is workable? Of course, together with my MDDs to support the early retirement of the coal power plant.
Takes us right back to what Courtney was saying at the beginning about the combined challenge of both adding the energy infrastructure necessary and also decarbonizing the existing energy infrastructure. We have just a couple of minutes. I'd like to give you each just a chance for a very quick final summary or any comments on any of these issues, particularly if you can emphasize US-Japan cooperation, but in closing.
Sure. So, I think most of my presentation was focusing on sort of the technical challenges. And I think that there is clear opportunity for the US and Japan to do more capacity building and technical support. And I do want to just highlight within that space a few technologies that I think are particularly valuable. And those include advanced nuclear reactors. Obviously, that's controversial in a number of countries. There's limited plans for that in Southeast Asia because of concerns over it. But there's significant interest as well because solar and wind are great, but they work in a fundamentally different way. And until we get widespread battery or other energy storage systems, such as hydrogen, perhaps, exploring other technologies is equally important. And then within that space as well, hydrogen, ways to produce green hydrogen, developing a green hydrogen market and a regional trade for that is something that we're seeing a lot of interest in Southeast Asia, again, because it can help stabilize solar and wind, which are going to be a key part of that transition. But US and Japan are leading a lot of the conversation, Japan in particular, on hydrogen in the region. So I think coordinating on first technical capacity building and support, and then second on investment in pilot projects is a good way to help bring some of these technologies to market in the region. And there's space for coordination and playing to each of America and Japan's strengths in that space.
Thank you. Suzuki-san?
I understand still the regional country in the Indo-Pacific region has some frustration for both Japan and the US to expand more to match with their needs. So of course we continue our best effort, but if you have any advice or concern regarding the US-Japan infrastructure cooperation, always welcome, and your kind advice, both from public side and the private side, energize JBIC. It is, I believe, this is a strength of JBIC. So please keep the kind support, the advice, or any critics also always welcome. So please have a conscious discussion, and we highly appreciate it. today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I want to quickly make 2 points. First is, as I said, hardware, when it comes to infrastructure development, hardware is not enough. It must come with software.
Mm.
And I think software part, as Suzuki-san mentioned, maybe Japanese companies have some expertise to share and be helpful to developing countries. And second point is, sometimes we tend to think in a short term, but if we deal with China, we have to switch our mindset and we have to try to think in a longer term perspective. I have a kind of an interesting story. Many Japanese people tend to see 1 year is a kind of a important time frame. But Chinese people tend to think 5-year term because they have a 5-year planning system. So they tend to think longer than we expect. So this is a kind of interesting, I think, lesson that we can learn. Think in a longer term perspective to be ready for potential risk.
Wonderful summary. Thank you for that reminder at the end. We'll think long-term about maybe bringing you all back next year.
Excellent.
Because this has been a wonderful series. Please join me in thanking our speakers. I'd also like to thank again the Embassy of Japan for their support of the series and my colleague Julianne Doscher, program manager here, who organized everything today. Thank you very much, Julie.
Thank you very much.
お疲れ様でした。